Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Devoted to the business of purveying food and decanting wines, Food and Wine Radio is a unique program highlighting not food recipes or wine vintages, but how to make a profit while satisfying America's palates. In this competitive but highly rewarding sector, many men and women have made profits while fulfilling a dream. Food and Wine Insider is all about better managing any business involving food and wine. Each week, your co-hosts sit down with successful restaurateurs, food mavens, winery vintners, store owners, food suppliers, and other leaders in the worldwide industry that centers on foodstuff and wine. In frank give-and-take sessions, guests and panelists talk about the business of bringing healthy and pleasurable foods and wines to others. Your Food and Wine Radio host are Ann Daw, former president of the Specialty Food Association and a longtime food executive who has held senior positions both here and abroad with Kraft Foods and Philip Morris. Don Mazzella, a nationally known business commentator. On each show, they invite leaders of the world's culinary and wine industries to share the secrets of their success. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
And our next guest is James Kornacki. He's CEO and founder of Ullo. It's something everyone should consider to give a wine connoisseur. James, welcome to the program. Tell us
Don,
now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before we go to Ann, tell us a little bit about your product and what it does, and then Ann will join us.
Great. Yeah. Well, Ullo is the wine purifier, and what that means is it takes sulfites out of wine. Sulfites are the one artificial chemical that's added to wine. They're there as a preservative, but they're what's associated with the headache and the hangover. So with Ullo, you can take that chemical out right when its job as a preservative is over, which is when you open the bottle.
Well, thank you, James. Really great to have you on the show. For our listeners, you might be interested to know that James is formally trained in chemistry as a PhD in chemistry. But he's also classically trained in the violin. So it seems to me that he's combined this science and art to creating this new product. I wanted you, James, to talk a little bit about the inspiration for creating Ullo.
Absolutely, and you really nailed it. I think art and science really do go together, and I am a scientist at heart, but I've always loved art, and I think the inspiration for the design of the product came from that preoccupation with art, as much as it was a science. But the inspiration for the product itself, the idea, came from my aunt. She is sensitive to sulfites. She would always turn wine away whenever it was offered. I remember a time at a Christmas party, and she turned it away, and everyone said, why? And she said, my doctor says I can't have this because of the sulfites. And this was, 15 years ago, nobody knew really what sulfites were. I think people know now. You see that warning label on the back of every bottle. It's a requirement to disclose the use of sulfites. And sometime in grad school, finishing up my PhD in chemistry, as you mentioned, I realized, I could probably solve this problem. I could take sulfites out of wine and not anything else, and not screw up the wine chemistry in the process. So I figured, art and design and knowing a bit about science kind of made me the right person to tackle this problem.
That's terrific. I'd love for you to tell our listeners where the Ullo name comes from, and because I do want people to know what this product is.
Sure. Yeah, it's spelled ULLO, and it's a question I get all the time. And honestly, coming up with a name was one of the hardest things my team and I did. But it comes from the historical alchemy symbol for purify. So our brand is based around science, and it's supposed to tell my story as a chemist. And we developed the brand story by looking at the history of chemistry and we found there was a whole language that alchemists used, and it was described in these symbols to define, elements or chemical processes. And the symbol for purify was essentially the U with the umlaut. So we took that symbol for purify and made up the rest of the name, something catchy and unique, and came up with Ullo. It was important for us that the name was a verb as well, so you could say you Ullo'd your wine, but that's the story of the name.
Wonderful. Where do you sell your product today? I did notice that it was on Amazon, but I wasn't sure what stores it might be in. I know you haven't been in business that long, but where do you sell it? And the second part of the question is, what challenges have you faced in gaining acceptance of the product?
Man, and that second part's the real kicker. But we've been really lucky, because I think it's a unique product and people like it, to have gotten some broad retail exposure. The product's only been out for a year, but we find ourselves nationwide with Best Buy, with Bloomingdale's, with Crate & Barrel, Sur La Table. We're in Total Wine & More, and a handful of others. We're on Amazon, and of course our own website, ullowine.com. In terms of challenges, I don't know where I start. I've always gotten, I think, my oohs and ahs from the chemistry PhD, but honestly, developing a new product and starting a business has been 1,000 times harder than that. One of the biggest challenges, as you mentioned, is gaining acceptance for something that hasn't existed before around a topic that in the wine world can be quite controversial, which is sulfites. And I think we tackled that by just being very honest with what the product does. We don't make any claims other than it removes sulfites from wine. And I think people know sulfites aren't good for you. I think people don't know that they're an added chemical, so we face a challenge there, but they know they're not good. So it's really enough for us to just say this takes sulfites out, gives you the option to aerate, and I think you connect that it's going to improve your wine drinking experience.
And I don't know that you mentioned the restaurant channel, but are you interested in restaurants actually having this type of product, especially high-end restaurants?
Yeah.
Experience
we are. The current product we designed really for the consumer to be perfect, whether you're drinking a glass by yourself or you're having a party and entertaining and want to serve many bottles. But, the restaurant channel is a huge opportunity for us. I used to work in restaurants. I think, I was a server in Applebee's and Bob Evans and a bunch of places when I was younger. And so I know that scene pretty well. And I think, it's very important for people to have experienced that. And so I think I can envision a product that is really well suited for a restaurant, given the challenges that servers and bartenders face. And that is, of course, a lot of work, a lot of time spent on your feet, and you need something that's quick and convenient. And so I have some ideas there for how we can really design something that's perfect for restaurants. So that's something we're exploring.
And any other channels that you're looking to expand to? I mean, it's clear that you're in the top end stores that make sense for this type of product. Specialty types, high tech types of retail. What other channels are you thinking about?
So much is moving online, and the way that we buy consumer products really has changed. So much is sold on Amazon. We're already there, but I think the way that we buy groceries and consequently buy wine is changing as well, and that's all moving online. So I see a lot of opportunity in wine clubs. I'm not a member yet. It's too easy for me to go to Binny's in Chicago and just stock up on wine. But eventually it might be more convenient to subscribe to a club, have your wine sent to you. A lot of people already do that. And I think to pair our products with that type of environment for the convenience, I think that's a huge avenue for us.
I think that's really important because you want to be getting to the key consumer that is really going to be interested in your product. And then from there, it'll evolve out. Other people will become interested. And so your channel strategy, your distribution strategy is really important, because you're saying, well, how am I going to approach those consumers that I'm trying to get to who are really core to my business, versus trying to be everywhere. And I think that you're really thinking through it very, very well. I was curious to know, how do you capture feedback from consumers?
Oh man, it's really easy now because of reviews online. We've never solicited reviews, and as an entrepreneur, as the inventor of this product, it's something I look at very closely, and it's something that's really personal for me, because it's a direct feedback on something that I helped create. And so we look at our online reviews very, very closely, and that to me has been one of the more rewarding aspects of this journey, because going into it, I knew I had a product that removed sulfites. I knew, in my experience at least, it made wine taste better. But until you get the product out there, you don't really know how it's going to be received. And you can't get the product out there until you've invested, years of your life into first developing it and then producing it. So, by that point, before we launched the product and had gotten it out to our crowdfunding backers, I was really concerned, because I liked it, but you just don't know what the reaction's going to be. And you see it very, very quickly, because as soon as people get it, if they don't like it, they will absolutely leave a bad review. But if they do like it, they may leave a good review. And when we got almost exclusively good reviews, it was really, really reassuring for me. So that's how I gauge the product acceptance. And it's also a way for me to, learn how we might improve the product for the future, because people are very unabashedly honest in their reviews, and it's something I appreciate.
Wonderful. You started to touch on it, and I think it's really helpful for the listeners to hear how you went about funding this venture, and where do you go from here in terms of continued expansion?
Sure. I had no experience in business at all when I started this. I came straight out of grad school, which really, when you're in the hard sciences, is kind of an alternate reality. It's not the working world. And so I just had no experience, and still managed to get some funding, which was, I think, one of the more challenging aspects for any entrepreneur. But I was supported tremendously by affiliates, mostly of Northwestern University, where I was studying. Got some private investment dollars from some of those folks, and used that to file the initial patents and to build the initial prototypes. And with that, we went straight to Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform I think your listeners are probably aware of. We did Indiegogo as well. Made a really awesome video, just told the story that I told you, how I was inspired to do this and how it works, and became the highest grossing wine-related project in crowdfunding history. So we raised most of our money from there, and that was enough to move things into production and then to launch, I think, in a pretty big way.
I think you said something really important in there, and that you made sure you had the patents, and I am sure you've trademarked the name and registered the trademark. You want to tell people a little bit about that in terms of what's involved in patenting a product, because you want to hold on to that and not have a lot of duplicates out there, at least for a certain period of time.
Sure. It's a really challenging process and a really expensive process. And I think when people see the cost, if you're an individual inventor like I am, there's really a lot of sticker shock. We think of the patent system as being there to protect individual inventors, but the reality is there aren't really many of us anymore. Typically, patents are sought by larger corporations, and either they engage their own attorneys or hire outside counsel, but you have to do that, and that's what makes it so expensive. I was really blessed to have been able to work with a good friend of mine who is a fellow PhD chemist who then got her law degree at Northwestern and became a rock star IP attorney. So with her help, I was able to save on the cost a little bit, but it's something we budgeted quite a bit for, because paying for the patent fees, the filing fees through the government, the patent office, is really very inexpensive, but you're also wholly incapable of doing that yourself. You have to have an attorney, and that's where the fees add up. So a utility patent, costing $50,000 is not unusual, and you really, really have to plan ahead for that expense because it's such an important part of your business's portfolio.
While you are the founder, you do have a team, and I think it's important for people to hear, what are the competencies you have on your team to help you continue to be successful?
The team means everything, and there's an idea now, I think, people follow the Silicon Valley model of entrepreneurship, where you try to create a venture very, very quickly, and you do that by assembling a team very, very quickly and working together toward your objective. I didn't take that approach. I started this independently and only very, very slowly and sort of methodically assembled a team of people that I knew were really good and that I really could trust. And what I got from that, I think the perfect team, I'm sort of the scientist and the guy who can talk about the product, the art and design guy. But I hired our COO, who is a veteran of the retail industry. He can speak the language of retail in a way that I never could. He knows the ins and outs. It's a very, very traditional business, believe it or not. We're doing something brand new in it, but consumer products is very traditional. And if you don't know how that game is played, you really can't participate. So hiring him was one of the smarter things I did, and of course our CTO, our technology officer, being a patent attorney himself and also a level 3 sommelier, made him sort of uniquely suited for the job. I met him at Northwestern. So the three of us together have been a very powerful team, and I think once you set the foundation with a strong core team, you start building the remaining parts of the team in very logical and consistent ways, and you just end up stronger. So I'm very, very grateful for my team.
That's fantastic. What would you do differently based on what you've learned to date? Anything you would have?
Yeah, I think every entrepreneur says they would have understood how expensive it all would be. They tell you to raise 3 times more than you think you need, and that's probably true. So, hindsight is 20/20. But if I knew what patents cost really, if I knew just the ultimate expense of everything. I grew up. I'm Dutch and Polish, and the Dutch side was always very frugal, and I thank my mom endlessly for that, because it's so easy when you're in the business world to just spend $1,000 here, $1,000 there, and just get it done with. But you have to really, I think, remain frugal to not blow your budget. We've been pretty good with that, and so I thank my mom there. But that's a tough thing to do.
Now, do you produce the product yourself, or is someone producing that product for you?
No, we work with partners all over the world. It's really surprising. It's a pretty simple product, but it's amazing how complex the supply chain is. We produce the injection molded parts and the packaging in Asia. We produce the resin for the filters, which is the heart and soul of the product. That's the chemistry behind it. That's made in Italy. That then all comes to the United States, so the filters are made here in the USA, and that all has to get aggregated somewhere. We work out of a suburb of Chicago, and then it gets sent back all over the world again. We're selling internationally through a few channels, and of course all over North America. So we work with partners everywhere. It's the only way I think a small team can have such a reach. And that's really just enabled by technology. We can be at our offices in Chicago and communicate with our vendors all over the world. It's pretty remarkable.
So I realize it might be early days to be asking this question, but what do you think is next?
I try not to think too far ahead there. When you do something like this, you're probably of the persuasion already that you look ahead. I'm always sort of looking ahead at the future and figuring out where I want the company to be, where I want myself to be personally, and that can be very stressful. I think right now I'm looking at the success that we have and feeling very grateful for seeing this concept become reality, and I'm trying to enjoy that and not think ahead. It's a very hard thing for me to do, but right now I'm happy with where we are, and I just hope we can continue it.
If you had advice to give for any other budding entrepreneurs, besides the fact that you should raise 3 times more than you need, what would that advice be?
I think the whole topic of advice is very interesting because so many people are willing to give you advice, and yet you have to determine whether that advice is worth taking. So for me, it's always been about trusting my intuition, and I think when you meet someone that's really trustworthy and is giving you good advice, someone who's altruistic and who really cares about what you're doing. And those people are few and far between, I've found, surprisingly so. There are a handful of advisors on our team that fall in that category, but I had to discern pretty early who those people were, and it becomes very clear, whether that advice is worth taking. So my advice would be find people that really believe in what you're doing and let them guide you, but trust your intuition above all else. And, of course, have confidence and resilience. To me, intuition, confidence, and resilience are the most important kind of fundamental characteristics. I've certainly had to rely on all of those, and, they're challenged from time to time. But the resilience, I guess, always pulls you back. So it's worked for me.
Well, I think that's terrific, and I would say you have one other thing, which is passion. And most entrepreneurs that I have noted, there's always 2 questions when investors are looking: is do they have the passion to be in this thing for the long term, and can they make money in it? Those are the 2 core questions. And it seems that you certainly are well on your way to that. I couldn't find anything on this topic about you, but something tells me that you also have a passion not only for producing this terrific product, but how you either give back or how you think about sustainability. Obviously, you care about the purity of this particular product, but I wonder if there are any causes or any community service things that you're involved in personally.
Well, when I was finishing my doctorate, I studied something called epigenetics, which is the role of the environment in shaping genomic expression. What that means is the role of the environment or things around you, chemicals, for example, or the air you breathe, or the water you drink, in actually changing your biochemistry. So that inspired Ullo, because I look at chemicals around us and I see things that are artificial, and I wonder, how does that then impact how we're living? And I think that's very, very important. I'm always interested in seeing where the science can take us there. And so right now, it's my goal is on making Ullo successful. But I would really love to see how we can translate that into direct science that actually is improving our quality of life in a way that is measurable and understandable, and not anecdotal, but really foundational. So I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but what I mean to say is we can use our own success to better understand the science that we're trying to describe and use that to give back to the world.
Well, I don't think it sounds wishy-washy at all. I think it sounds very inspirational. So I congratulate you on that. I congratulate you on your success, and I hope that you will continue to be very successful and continue to do things that will make the world a better place and make experiences more pleasurable and more healthy. And with that, Don, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ann. We've been talking with the founder and creator of Ullo, James Kornacki. A link to his website will be on our website, Food and Wine Insider, tonight. Thank you so much, James, for being with us.
Don and Ann, thank you so much as well. It's been my pleasure.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com. You are listening to Ann Daw and Don Mazzella, and the program is Food and Wine Insider. If you have a question or know someone you think our listeners should hear, contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Remember, our programs are heard every Wednesday and Saturday on this station via amfm247.com or on iHeartRadio, as well as Roku Television. You can listen to past shows at foodandwineinsider.com.
Our next guest is someone I'm looking forward to, Eddie Yoon, who is a futurist and wrote recently in the Harvard Business Review about the fact that appears only 10% of Americans cook dinner at home nowadays. Eddie, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your company, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm a growth strategist, and I left my role as a senior partner at the Cambridge Group, which is a growth strategy firm, and I was there about 2 decades. And I recently started up my own think tank and advisory firm called Eddie Would Grow, focused on writing and speaking and kind of big ideas about the best ways to grow a business. And as part of that, to your point, I have written and thought quite extensively about the food and beverage business, food service, and kind of the way we eat overall, and did some reflection over my career and found some really interesting things about the direction of where things might be headed.
Hi, Eddie. Thanks for joining us in the program today. You refer to yourself as a growth strategy expert. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so something that my wife has been asking for some time now. So it's basically I help companies grow, and the strategy is like assuming you don't have unlimited resources and time, what's the best way to kind of position your best people, your money, and your effort that will drive the most results for your business. And part of what I've realized is my expertise is that at a very high level is that people try to grow usually one way that's very bad. And let's imagine that you and I are both in the shrimp business, as it were, and that your goal is to grow and my goal is to grow, but the way that I'm going to grow is to take a slice of your pie from the shrimp business, right? And that kind of share stealing, what I found over the years, is the most practiced form of growth, but it's the least effective in the long run. And actually, McKinsey did a study recently that backed it up. The far better ways of growing, what I've discovered, are 2 other ways: is to grow the category, which is to say, how do I grow, get more people to eat shrimp more of the time and pay a higher price for it? Or beyond that, it's the other angle is, how do you create a new category, which is to say, is shrimp something that could be used for an entirely different business? And so there's a company called Beyond Brands that's coming out with some next generation powders to prevent food allergies, and that shrimp is one of them. And that the idea is that they've solved for about a dozen or so food allergies, where you can get a powder right as your baby is about to take solids and you mix it in with the food. and that some Stanford doctors and researchers have proven that if you do this, that you greatly reduce the risk of food allergies down the road, which is an entirely new category using shrimp.
Wow, fantastic. Eddie, you've written about super consumers. Who are they? How do they behave? And what can marketers learn through them?
Yeah, so these are people who, the simplest way to describe them is they really love and they spend a lot of money on a category. So if I kind of beat this horse into the ground and sting with the shrimp thing, if you think back to the Forrest Gump movie and, his friend Bubba, Tom Hanks' friend there, right, was shrimp all the time, right? It's kind of what that guy was, and that there are those people that are uber passionate about a category. They spend a lot, and therefore they know a lot about it. And what I found is that they are in every single category that you can think of. And I've actually yet to run into a category in any country where those people don't yet exist. And so what's interesting is that, you can kind of imagine like a category like shrimp where there's some really, aficionados and people who really love it. But beyond that, I found it to be the case in basic categories like white socks and staplers and scissors, where you wouldn't imagine that there'd be passionate people, but they actually are there. And that the key is that my basic findings from writing the book with HBR is that not only are these people in every category, they're pretty much right under your nose. And that if you have data of any kind, and if it looks like a flat line, but there's an EKG bump somewhere, usually that's a sign of a consumer, right? So Rome, Georgia has the highest per capita consumption of Coca-Cola. It's about an hour away from the Coke headquarters, as you can imagine. And that where I grew up in Hawaii has the highest per capita consumption of Spam, kind of going back to the old days where, fresh food was hard. And so canned food kind of ruled the day and was a lifesaver. And that with the military presence there, you had quite a bit of Spam that kind of got built into the culture there. But like this idea that you can find them in the spikiness of your data, that super consumers, they're not born, they're kind of evolve into becoming that way, and that it's in their origin stories that you get to these really cool insights about how you might be able to grow a category or create a new one. And so I think, Ann and Don, back to the original premise of the article, is that what I found was that only about 10% of consumers love to cook and cook most of the time. And that that number has shrunk by a third over the last 15 years or so. And that the real problem with that is that cooking has gone from a ubiquitous category where most people did it most of the time back to a niche category where some people are doing it some of the time. And that the reason why that's important is that the primary driver for growth for most companies is the tailwind of the category. That my premise is if you're fundamentally it's ensconced in the cooking business versus the eating business, then you're going to face a lot more headwinds in growing your business than, say, if you were on the eating side of things where you should experience a lot of tailwinds. And that ultimate strategy is no matter what you do, how great your brand is, how great your products are, how well you price them, and how well you can kind of get it out there and make them, it actually the fundamental strategy question that matters more is, are you in the right category in the first place? And that's where I think a lot of food and beverage companies have to take a hard look and say, is my category going to be relevant for the next 20, 30 years? And if not, why am I in it? How do I get out of it and get into a different space that's actually going to be better for me?
Eddie, you great segue into the next topic, which is you've written about grocery shopping and cooking are in long-term decline. You reference a shift from a mass category with daily activity to a niche activity. People just do some of the time. So can you tell us a little bit about your research on cooking habits, and then we'll get into the implications for the grocery channel and the food industry in general. But first on the cooking habits, and then we'll move to what does the grocery channel need to do about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, the cooking habits are an interesting one. Of my observation, just having done lots of work in the space here, is that a lot of it is just kind of unconscious, right? what you grew up eating, what you might have picked up learning from your family or your friends or whatnot along the way. And that a lot of it is just kind of inertia. And that for me as a Korean American, a lot of the things that I cook, and I do like to cook, not all the time, but are influenced from my family of origin. So my parents as immigrants from Korea, growing up in Hawaii, that has a huge influence on what I can make and what I prefer to make. And that what's interesting about that is most of it, I would say, is kind of unconscious and on autopilot, right? And so, and the food industry has largely benefited from population growth of like, hey, you got a bunch of people on autopilot, and when their family of origin is more or less the same, then the same menu items keep popping up, and I can build a business on scale there because it's going to be hamburgers, it's going to be spaghetti, it's going to be beef stew, taco night, whatever, right? Now, you take a couple of fundamental shifts that have happened, right, is that obviously multicultural is a huge phenomenon, and as I was just talking about for myself, but also for the broader country. And that the part that people get wrong about multicultural is that a lot of the stats and the headlines are that, hey, in 2040 or 2050, it's going to be majority minority. And articles that I've written in HBR have said that, you know what, in about the top 20 of 25 cities, majority minority is already there, right? And therefore, that has a dramatic impact on the food that you eat. So when I talk about pulled pork in Kansas City, they call it pulled pork, right, from a pork butt and a pork shoulder. When I talk about a pork butt and a pork shoulder in LA, they call it carnitas. And you don't, whether you're Hispanic, you're white, you're Asian, you're black, you call it carnitas there, right? And that the fundamental shift in demographics has changed the way that we eat, number one. What's ended up happening there is that when you have a palate that craves certain things, like I know how to make some Korean things because I learned from my mom. If you get somebody who doesn't know how to make Korean things because they don't have a family with it, but they like it, that's a lot harder to make, and therefore you're going to opt to go out to eat instead of the trial and error of I've done it 15 times and now I know how to do it. Secondarily to that is you have the whole phenomenon of food TV, right? And so one of the things I write about in the article is that it appears that the net effect of people who love to watch food TV is that it hasn't actually increased their desire to cook. It's increased their desire to eat and to watch more food TV. And I liken it to, there's a good story about my high school chemistry teacher who, he went to Harvard as an undergrad, played the cello, sat next to Yo-Yo Ma for one semester and never touched the cello since then because he was just so despondent about how good he was and how good he would never be. He was like, forget it. And he was good, right? He was good enough to sit second seat. But I think that phenomenon is the same thing of what's happening on the cooking side and cooking shows is that I am never going to be an Iron Chef. It's fun to watch them, but I'm never going to do the discipline of the knife skills and or buy the equipment and the gear to get there. Now, you have a small select set of people who are willing to do that, right? But it remains, most of them, even though they're passionate about it, it's not necessarily something that they do all of the time. And so you got the multicultural dynamic, you got the whole food TV kind of raising the bar in a way that's really hard. And the third one that's really happening is you have this massive innovation on the food service side and a massive lack of innovation on the grocery side that's going on. So on the food service side, what you see is not only great strides in the formats that's there. So, Domino's is a stock that you don't think about as a tech company, but they're just as much of a tech company as anyone that's out there. And in fact, if you had put $1,000 into Domino's stock on January 2010, you would have done better than had you put that same money in Apple, Google, or Facebook or Amazon there, because it's on a rocket ship, largely because people love pizza, but also because they have done a masterful job of investing in technology where you can text in your order really quickly, and that over half their orders are now digital, which is a remarkable finding. So food service companies have innovated in a big way. They're much easier on mobile. We're all addicted to our smartphones. The formats have gotten better. So sticking on the pizza trend, right, you got the Blaze pizzas, the mod pizzas that have reinvented the time elapsed to do that. And that's put pressure on grocery stores where I would say, I mean, a large part of the reason why I wrote that article, and for the food industry, is that I love the food industry and I want them to do better, and I want them specifically to embrace technology like they used to. Like, we forget that, you know, the things that we look down upon now, of like, oh, frozen food is not fresh, is that back in the day when Bird's Eye created that category, it was massively innovative. The product was innovative. They invented a distribution to allow for frozen to go on there. People forget that the can of food that is shelf stable for months and you're kind of suspect about it now as quality, like, it was a major technological breakthrough back in the day, and that canning actually predated Louis Pasteur's findings on pasteurization by decades, right? And so you think about the food industry and the grocery stores used to be pioneers from a technology standpoint, used to be pioneers from a scientific standpoint, and then now I'm like, where's that all gone? Like, it's all gone towards advertising, which is fine, but it's not going to make up for the fact that we haven't innovated in this space for decades, right? It's gone to incremental innovations versus really breakthrough ones. Like, this is a whole thing around, do you know the fundamental reasons why we're in this spot where there's a massive headwind against cooking and shopping? Are all of these things. It's gotten more complex and joyful for an eater, but harder for a cooker. The bar has been raised, so you're more fun being a voyeur than a doer there with it. And then the third one is just this whole food service has gotten way better and gotten pretty cheap, actually, too, whereas food in grocery stores hasn't really changed much in the last, 50 plus years or so.
Eddie, I think that's a great segue into to talk about technology and to think about what it means, partly what it means for the grocery channel, but also what the food industry needs to do to get back in. I personally came from CPG, and I saw all that happening over the last 14 decades, and the innovation is gone because it was, shareholder equity became very important. It was easier to price. It was, and reduce costs, because that all lended to the bottom line. So now we are sort of living with that, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about the impact of small companies on the food industry. But in terms of the greater food industry, the bigger food industry, and the grocery channel specifically, because now you have Amazon having bought Whole Foods, I would love to hear your thoughts on what does this mean for the grocery channel? What does this mean for the food industry? What does the food industry need to do?
Yeah, no, it's I think the place that I would start, right? And so my focus on strategy is less about execution and more about, as I said, what category you're in. I recently spoke at the Grocerant conference for the Progressive Grocer last week around grocerants, right? So there's this emerging trend of people in grocery stores creating, not only hot deli bars, but actual restaurants in the store. And my big point there was, hey, grocery stores, you got to ask yourself the question, like, your strategy would be different if a grocerant is one of the many things that you're doing. And it would be different if that was the main thing that you were doing. And so the premise that I pose to them is like, which one is the tail and which one is the dog, right? Are you fundamentally a grocery store that has a little grocerant on the side, like a restaurant? Or are you fundamentally a grocerant that also you can tack on some apples and bananas and celery along the way, right? And that's a pretty massive decision that people have to make, because Whole Foods, you talked about Amazon, Whole Foods, it's one of the few stores out there like a Wegmans or some of the other higher end ones where if you said to your significant other, let's go out for a date and let's go eat at Whole Foods, you wouldn't get slapped across the face, than if you said went to a traditional grocery store, right? And that, fundamentally, I think the question that people have to ask is, am I, what I make and what I offer, is it in the business of eating, or is it in the business of shopping and cooking? And it's not to say that you have to be all the way to food service. Like, I was just going to say, like, if you are making products that offer restaurant quality food with great freshness, clean label, that you can cook in 5 minutes or less, that's a lot closer to eating than a 30-minute, bake time or a 60-minute thing that's there. So the big point there is that there's a lot of change going on, what fundamental business that you're in, but there's shades of gray too, and that Ann and Don, like, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the slowest guy that's out there, right? And so if your thing is a little bit closer to eating than it is cooking or shopping, and it's positioned against somebody who's, much worse than you, that's probably going to be okay, at least for the short term here, right? So what business are you fundamentally in? Be precise, pick a shade of gray that you can actually live into without wholesale changing your business there. And then I think the last bit is when you're thinking about that spectrum of the trade-off of time versus taste, freshness and nutrition, and convenience and quality that's there, really look hard at what is the available science and technology that already exists that you've overlooked because it didn't fit your business model. Like the part that I continue to be amazed by is some of my favorite people in the food and beverage industry are the R&D folks, and how much science and technology already exists about really cool next generation things that can be done in food and beverage, but are not yet commercialized because it would be disruptive to my core business, or I can't connect the dots, or my marketers don't care about science, they just want to move product or this and that with it there. And so if you've made a decision about what business are you in, and then secondarily, where precisely are you going to play, in the spectrum of eating versus cooking and shopping. Then the third one is what technology is readily available to me, either in how I make the food, how I distribute the food, or even a different business model or how I would profit from it. This is the whole thing about creating new categories I talk about. There are 8 levers of creating new categories. On the product side, there's brand, the experience, there's the pricing, there's the benefit, and then on the business model side, there's how you make it, how you market it, how you sell it or move it, and then how you profit from it. There's so many different levers for how you might be able to reinvent your business model that I think would be really powerful, not only through the food science and technology that's out there, but the digital and the IT technology that is available to you to reinvent that's there. So, I mean, it's like HelloFresh, Blue Apron, they're moving in the right direction. They are by no means the final destination of what the ultimate of cooking is going to be, because I'll tell you that people like HelloFresh, but it solves for the problem of shopping and a wee bit on the cooking side, but it's not all the way there. And there's still significant trade-offs of you have to be willing to submit to their culinary choice of menu there. And therefore, whenever I see trade-offs, what I know is that there's still more opportunity to grow there.
In one of your articles, you talked a little bit about, the food industry needing to move more towards premium. And from a technological standpoint, you made a very interesting connection between microwave-assisted thermal sterilization and its impact on food waste. I wonder if you could chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, that goes back to, I think, the amazing things that technology can now offer us. And you see technology disrupting, obviously, in the tech industry, but the media industry has been disrupted. Transportation is being disrupted. It would just be arrogant for those of us who serve the food business to think that it wouldn't happen here. But what it enables is a higher order purpose that I actually think gets back to the question of what business are we in, right? Because the food industry grew up around food scarcity, food safety was a real problem, right? So it was canned foods exist because if you didn't do it that way, you might kill people. And so it was a matter of life and death, and the role and the purpose of food had a lot more prominence than it does today, where you're not so much worried about day-to-day, am I going to die if I eat this? Now, take a step back. If you were to say, how would I find a new purpose that would be not only important for the people that work there and a good business proposition, but frankly, a way to recapture the attention of millennials who are very much interested in purpose-driven brands, right? Is I think some of the sad state of affairs that some of the natural disasters around the U.S. are reminding us is that food is not necessarily a given. Day to day, maybe it is for most Americans, but there are millions of people in America that are still food insecure, and that solving for food insecurity through technology is a noble thing, but it's also something that could potentially be a great business. Beyond food insecurity is the whole issue of food waste, and that we're making a big deal about electric cars and the potential to save the environment that it has there. Make a big deal about plastics and recycling, but one of the amazing things. If you take a step back, right, I had a biology teacher, who would talk about, some aspects of, doing good is, it's not enough to just do good. If you're just, it's a garden hose on a forest fire, it's not going to make a difference. Like, pick something that actually is going to matter. And that food waste, it turns out, is probably the single biggest enemy from an eco-friendly environment, in the standpoint of nearly a fifth or a quarter of all landfill is food waste, right? So all, because they can't sell it in time, they're with it. That a quarter to 20% of all water waste is contributed to food waste. Like, you use water to grow the food that doesn't get eaten, and that rather than get up in arms about bottled water, like, what we can do, because it's easier to point the finger, but if we can all just eat what we buy and not waste things and do things in a different way, you save on landfill, you save on water, precious water that's there, and it would probably have a cascading effect on the environment that is far greater than anything else that's out there. And that's the whole point of, like, where I think the food and meal delivery to people have an edge on is, yeah, you're going to spend more money, but the end outcome is that there's less waste in the system, and that despite the fact that it might use more packaging and plastics, like, that's missing the point. The real point of it is, how do I solve for a quarter of the landfill and water wasted is by eating exactly what I bought. And that's a mission and a purpose that if any big brand or company kind of was really reoriented their business around that, not only would I think that they would find new fans from millennials who are the future, but consumers, but also basically see them as a lot of big companies and brands as written off. But it's actually a very viable business model, because what it means is you can charge more per unit, per meal, than you do now today. And frankly, in a world where things are going from most people do it most of the time to a niche, as you said, Anne, the way out is by premiumization. And you can only premiumize by actually offering differentiated benefits through a purpose that matters to a lot of people there.
Well, that's terrific, and I thank you for that, Eddie, and I think it was incredibly clear. A little shift now to the impact of small companies on the food industry. I think you wrote that 49% of the growth in the last 4 years is from 20,000 companies that are below the top 100 largest. Big companies, of course, are also gobbling them up. But I believe you have a perspective on why these brands haven't grown as significantly as they could. And if you could speak a little bit about that, that would be fabulous.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is a large part of it is there's a rejection of large, and so we're at an interesting point in our country where, if you're a big institution, the level of distrust is pretty high, regardless of what entity that you're in, be it big business, media, or government and whatnot there. So you have a fundamental, headwind. If you're big and established, then that's kind of one strike against you. But that a lot of these more nimble, up-and-coming companies and brands, they're just kind of looking at the world differently, right? And so you have, if you think about the craft beer phenomenon, I've done a lot of work in the beer industry as well. A lot of the hardcore craft heads would say craft beer is just superior than kind of regular mainstream American beer. What I know from a brewing process is that it's actually quite difficult to brew a light lager like a Bud Light that's out there from a technical standpoint. But that craft beer, because of the style that it is, it's a lot easier to hide mistakes and errors and quality things and whatnot. So there's this interesting phenomenon of people discovering new things that are out there that big companies are just fundamentally not incented to do, because you make so much more money selling one more of the thing that you already make than trying something entirely new, right? So you have kind of this mistrust of big. The economic incentives of big organizations are kind of work against them there. And that these new entrepreneurs, they're able to start small and be nimble and drive towards new tastes, but also in local areas. That I think is really what matters there. Is that the big part of the insight for me on the local brands is that, like when I've done work for global companies, that what was always striking to me is how much care and concern they put into understanding the difference between the Belgian market and the French market and the Luxembourg market, but they kind of treat the U.S. as all the same, right? And it could be further from the truth that, the people where I grew up in Honolulu have a vastly different set of demands from a food and beverage perspective than they do in Houston or they do, in anywhere else in the country that's out there. And that the advantage that a small guy has out there, or gal, is that they can tap into these local nuances that, not everybody drinks the same way, not everyone wants to eat the same way, and that it's all driven by these local nuances. And that from a demand perspective, if you're in a business that's one size fits all, you're at a fundamentally, massive disadvantage versus a company that's more nimble to be able to serve uniquely the needs of the local people that's there. And so I think you have this real phenomenon. It's not necessarily that small is better inherently, and actually the quality, despite critics, is actually better in bigger companies there. But it's that they're structurally not set up to serve, like they're incented to sell more of what they could traditionally make. It's hard for them to react, and it's much easier for the local people to tap into what's naturally happening, which is the diversification and variety seeking that's happening in America at a localized level when it comes to what your people eat and drink.
This has been a fascinating time with this, but Ann and Eddie, I hate to stop, but it's time for us to say goodbye to Eddie. We're talking with Eddie Yoon. Your website again and how people can reach you?
My website is www.eddiewoodgrow.net. That's Eddie, E-D-D-I-E. You can reach me at Twitter, Eddie Would Grow, or my email is eddie@eddiewoodgrow.net. So happy to be on, and thanks for the fun conversation.
Thank you, Eddie.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book. I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. He tells us of his life successes and failures that have made him and his clients so successful. Over the years, Bob has brought 77 companies back from the brink and changed them into thriving, profitable businesses. His energy is amazing, and at 74, he proves that you can still have a great deal to give others if you just try. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. One insight struck me was that most companies do not have a plan. The old Chinese proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, is true today. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
Now it's time for Ann Dawes' thoughts on what's happening today.
Sustainability is a complex topic, but in simple terms, it basically means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It involves how we can and should think differently about production and processing and distribution, consumption and waste management. And why we should focus on those things is to positively impact the environment, the economy, and social health. I'm not intending to preach here, but an area of certainly of concern, it's not only in the restaurant business but in the food business, is waste. It's almost inconceivable to me that people can go hungry in the U.S. and certainly in many places around the world, but we waste 30 to 40% of the food supply. We want our fruits and vegetables to look perfect. We may not care that our portions are bigger than they need to be, and yet then they're not really fully eaten. But what's happening? I think the stories that aren't happening is the things that I have personally seen in so many wonderful local. They could be non-for-profit. They could be supported by for-profit companies at the local level. Gleaning programs, meal pack programs. You have City Harvest. You have City Meals on Wheels. You have so many different great programs. It just takes getting involved, because we might not be able to change things at the national or the state level, but we can certainly help our local communities and our neighbors. And I think we all have a role to play in that, and to make a difference and make sure that the future continues to be bright and that people are fed and we do all of the things that bring communities together.
Thank you and goodbye.
You've been listening to Food and Wine Insider with Ann Daw and Don Mazzella. Want to join us on a future show? Contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Until next time, have a passion for food, wine, and profits, and think of our program, Food and Wine Insider.